Winter winds howl as the determined Black Widow pulls 3 starving Comanche children from her barn. Unaware she's about to change the life of their warrior father, who desperately searches the frozen plains for them. The frontier town whispers cruel judgments. The grieving woman has lost her mind, they say, taking in enemy children when decent folk cross the street to avoid her. They expect her to crumble under the weight of her foolish compassion, another broken soul claimed by the unforgiving West. Miles away, the fierce warrior tracks through dangerous territory, driven by love for his missing triplets, his path unknowingly converging with hers. But buried secrets about how these children came to be lost could either forge an impossible alliance between 2 outcasts or destroy the fragile family before it can heal both their wounded hearts. Will truth unite them, or tear apart the only hope these children have? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. Hope Whitfield pulled her threadbare shawl tighter against the December wind. The funeral flowers on her husband's grave had withered black 3 weeks ago. She hadn't replaced them. Money was scarce now that Samuel was gone. The small cabin felt emptier each night. Samuel's carpentry tools gathered dust in the corner. His coffee cup sat unwashed by the sink. Hope stared at it every morning, unable to bring herself to put it away. Copper Ridge had never welcomed her with open arms. Being the only black family in town meant keeping to themselves. Samuel's skilled hands had earned grudging respect from the white settlers who needed furniture built. Now that he was gone, so was their tolerance. Mrs. Henderson from the general store had made it clear. Credit was no longer available, cash only. Hope's teaching certificate from back east meant nothing here. No one would hire a black woman to educate their children. The winter of 1847 was proving especially brutal. Hope counted her remaining coins each night. $15 and change. Enough for maybe 2 weeks of supplies if she stretched every penny. Meanwhile, 3 days' ride north, Gray Wolf Running led his small band through the snow-covered hills. His 3 children rode close beside him. Little Moon, Rising Sun, and Thunderheart had grown thin. Promises they never kept. Treaties were signed and broken within seasons. His patience was wearing thin. In Copper Ridge, Dr. Minerva Ashworth finished stitching up a ranch hand's wounded arm. The man grumbled about paying a woman doctor but needed the medical care. Minerva had faced skepticism her entire career. Being one of the few female physicians west of the Mississippi meant proving herself daily. She treated everyone who came to her door. Color didn't matter when someone was bleeding. This philosophy had earned her enemies among certain townspeople. They tolerated her services, but whispered behind her back. The storm hit on a Tuesday night. Snow fell in thick sheets, driven sideways by howling winds. Hope huddled by her small fireplace, rationing her last pieces of firewood. Gray Wolf's band had taken shelter in a canyon 20 miles away. The children pressed close to him for warmth. The horses stamped nervously as the wind picked up. Something felt wrong about this storm. The cavalry patrol appeared without warning. Lieutenant Morrison had orders to push any tribes further north. The storm provided perfect cover for a surprise approach. Confusion erupted in the canyon. Horses reared. Children cried out in fear. In the chaos of swirling snow and shouting men, Gray Wolf lost sight of his triplets. The children had been gathering firewood when the soldiers appeared. Frightened by the noise and gunfire, they ran blindly into the storm. The wind swallowed their small voices. Snow covered their tracks within minutes. When the patrol finally withdrew, Gray Wolf searched frantically. He called their names until his voice grew hoarse. His warriors helped scan every nearby gulch and cave. The children had vanished completely. 2 days later, Hope heard scratching sounds coming from her barn, probably mice looking for shelter. She grabbed Samuel's old lantern and trudged through the snow to investigate. The barn door creaked open. Her lantern light revealed 3 small figures huddled in the corner. Native children, barely alive. Their lips were blue with cold. Their eyes held the hollow look of starvation. Hope didn't hesitate. She scooped up the nearest child and felt how light the small body was. These children were dying. The other 2 could faces in Hope's window. The accusations came swift and harsh. Hope was harboring savages. She was putting the entire town at risk. Decent folk demanded she turn the children over to Marshal Creed immediately. Hope stood on her front porch facing a dozen angry neighbors. Behind her, through the window, 3 small faces peered out with frightened eyes. These children had survived against impossible odds. They had somehow found their way to her door when they needed help most. The crowd grew louder, angrier. They wanted those children gone. Hope looked at each familiar face, seeing fear and hatred where she had once hoped for understanding. She thought of Samuel and what he would have done. She thought of the 3 small lives depending on her protection. Hope squared her shoulders and spoke her decision clearly. The children would stay. The town's anger hit Hope like a physical blow. Mrs. Henderson refused her business entirely. The blacksmith turned his back when she approached. Children threw rocks at her windows while their parents watched approvingly. Hope had expected hostility. She hadn't expected the complete isolation that followed. Within days, Copper Ridge had built an invisible wall around her property. No one would speak to her. No one would sell to her. She had become a ghost in her own community. Inside the cabin, something remarkable was happening. The 3 children were recovering faster than Hope had dared hope. Little Moon, the only girl, had been the first to smile. Rising Sun spoke in whispers but never stopped watching the door. Thunderheart, the youngest, clung to Hope's skirt whenever she moved around the cabin. Hope tried speaking to them in English. They responded with musical sounds she didn't recognize. She pointed to objects and said their names. Cup, spoon, fire. The children repeated the words carefully, then offered their own language in return. Their word for water sounded like flowing wind. Fire reminded Hope of crackling leaves. The children's patience amazed her as they taught her simple phrases. She hadn't realized how much she missed teaching until these eager students appeared in her life. Something awakened in Hope during those lessons. Her mind, which had felt sluggish since Samuel's death, suddenly sparked with energy. Little Moon's real name meant silver light on water. Rising Sun was warmth that chases shadows. Thunderheart was brave sound that calls rain. Hope practiced until she could say each name with the right inflection. In return, she shared her own story through simple English words and gestures. They learned that the man in the photograph had been her husband, that he was gone now, that she lived alone until they came. The children understood loss. Hope could see it in their eyes when they looked toward the mountains. They missed someone too, someone important, who was probably searching for them right now. 20 miles north, Gray Wolf Running had not stopped looking. He tracked every possible path his children might have taken. He questioned other tribes. He studied the wind patterns from that terrible night. His warriors respected his determination, but they were growing concerned. Gray Wolf ate little. He slept less. His eyes held a wildness that worried even his closest friends. A man could only lose so much before something inside him broke forever. Gray Wolf had heard whispers from traders about a black woman in Copper Ridge who had taken in Indian children. The stories seemed impossible. Why would any white settler risk community anger for native orphans? Most frontier folk would have turned the children over to authorities immediately. But the descriptions matched his triplets. 3 children around 6 years old, 2 boys and a girl. found nearly dead from cold and hunger. Grey Wolf's heart hammered against his ribs every time he considered the possibility. He began watching Copper Ridge from the hills. His keen eyes studied the smoke patterns from chimneys. He noted which houses showed signs of extra occupants. One small cabin drew his attention repeatedly. Through his spyglass, Grey Wolf glimpsed small faces in a particular window. The distance was too great for certainty, but something about their movements seemed familiar. The way the smallest one tilted his head, the protective stance the girl took near the door. The black woman puzzled him. She moved around town like someone carrying a heavy burden. Other settlers avoided her completely. She appeared to be as much an outcast as any displaced tribe member. Grey Wolf watched her tend a small garden behind the cabin. She worked with efficient movements that had worked perfectly. Scattered tribes were easier to relocate than unified ones. Now those missing children threatened his carefully laid plans. If they were being cared for by a local resident, questions might be asked about how they had become separated from their people. Creed needed to secure the children before anyone started investigating too closely. He gave Hope 48 hours to surrender the children voluntarily. After that, he would take them by force. The law was on his side. Local opinion supported him. One isolated black woman couldn't stand against federal authority. Hope received the ultimatum while teaching the children to write English letters. They had drawn pictures of horses and mountains. Their artwork showed a deep connection to the land that Hope found beautiful and heartbreaking. She looked at their trusting faces and made her choice. Marshal Creed could threaten all he wanted. These children had found safety in her home. They were learning, growing stronger, laughing again. Hope would not surrender them to a system that saw them as problems to be solved rather than young lives to be nurtured. Marshal Creed's deadline arrived with the morning sun. Hope watched through her window as he approached with 2 deputies. The children sensed danger and huddled close to her. Little Moon gripped Hope's hand tightly. Creed knocked once before pushing the door open. His eyes swept the cabin, taking inventory of the children's belongings. Handmade toys, small clothes hanging by the fire. Evidence of a family life that complicated his simple narrative. Hope stood between the marshal and the children. Her voice was steady when she spoke. The children were under her protection. They were healthy and learning. She would not hand them over to strangers who saw them as burdens. Creed's jaw tightened. Federal law trumped personal feelings. These children belonged in government schools where they could be properly civilized. Hope was interfering with official policy. The confrontation ended in stalemate. Creed couldn't remove the children by force without risking public criticism. Hope couldn't protect them forever against federal authority. Both sides knew this was temporary peace. After Creed left, Hope felt eyes watching from the tree line. A figure moved between the pines with practiced stealth. Someone had been observing his eyes held familiar warmth. The children recognized him instantly. Thunderheart burst into tears of joy. Rising Sun ran to the door. Little Moon spoke rapidly in their native language, explaining everything that had happened. Grey Wolf knelt to embrace his children. His relief was so profound that his hands shook. They were alive. They were healthy. The black woman had saved them when he could not. Hope watched the reunion with mixed emotions, joy at seeing the children's happiness, sorrow at the thought of losing them. These weeks together had filled the empty spaces in her heart that Samuel's death had created. Grey Wolf studied Hope carefully. She was smaller than he had expected. Her clothes showed signs of poverty, but the cabin was clean and warm. His children showed no fear of her. They spoke English words mixed with Comanche phrases, creating a unique blend of languages. Hope offered Grey Wolf food and coffee. He accepted cautiously. They sat across from each other while the children played nearby. Neither spoke the other's language well, but both understood the weight of this moment. Through gestures and simple words, Hope learned his name. Grey Wolf discovered that Hope had been a teacher before coming west. She showed him the children's artwork and their attempts at writing English letters. Grey Wolf saw how his children had flourished under Hope's care. Little Moon demonstrated new skills with obvious pride. Rising Sun shared his drawings of horses and mountains. Thunderheart practiced counting in English while holding Hope's hand. The children served as translators, switching between languages with growing excitement. They explained to their father how Hope had found them dying in the barn, how she had fed them and taught them and protected them from angry townspeople. Grey Wolf felt gratitude deeper than words could express. This woman had risked everything for children who weren't her own. She had given them safety when their own people couldn't protect them. But questions remained. Where would the children be safest? Hope's cabin offered love and education, but also isolation and constant threat from authorities. Grey Wolf's band provided cultural connection, but lived under constant pressure from cavalry patrols. The children sensed the adults' dilemma. Little Moon spoke carefully in both languages, addressing Hope and her father equally. She didn't want to choose Creed's movements and suspected trouble was brewing. Her medical bag provided a legitimate excuse for checking on the children. She stopped short when she saw Grey Wolf. Her training kicked in automatically. Was anyone injured? Did the children need medical attention? Her professional instincts overrode any social prejudices. Grey Wolf recognized her genuine concern. This white woman, like Hope, seemed to care more about his children's welfare than their race. Perhaps not all outsiders were enemies. Dr. Ashworth examined each child thoroughly. They were thriving under Hope's care, better nourished and healthier than many white children she treated in town. She documented their condition carefully in her medical notes. The doctor's presence legitimized the unusual family situation. Her professional opinion carried weight with authorities. If she declared the children healthy and well cared for, it would be harder for Creed to justify removing them. Night fell while the adults continued their careful negotiations. Grey Wolf would not abandon his children again. Hope couldn't bear to lose them after they had brought such meaning to her life. The children fell asleep curled together on Hope's bed, unaware that their futures hung in the balance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges from Marshal Creed and federal authorities. But tonight, for the first time since that terrible storm, all three children slept safely under their father's protection, while surrounded by Hope's love. Grey Wolf stayed through the night, sleeping on the floor beside his children's bed. Hope watched the sunrise paint the cabin walls gold, knowing this fragile peace couldn't last. Marshal Creed would return with reinforcements. The town's anger was growing stronger each day. But something had changed during the dark hours. Hope and Grey Wolf had found a common language beyond words. They both wanted the children safe. They both understood that love transcended the boundaries others tried to impose. The children woke to find both their protectors present. Little Moon prepared breakfast, using skills Hope had taught her. Rising Sun showed his father the English letters he could write. Thunderheart sat contentedly between the two adults, speaking freely in both languages. Doc Ashworth returned that morning with disturbing news. She had the documents across Hope's kitchen table. Medical reports from cavalry physicians, supply requisitions that didn't match official troop numbers, payment vouchers for services that were never rendered. The pattern became clear. Creed had been manufacturing conflicts to justify increased military presence. Each engineered incident brought more federal resources under his control, more power, more opportunities for personal advancement. The children's separation from their father wasn't an accident of war. It was a calculated move in Creed's larger strategy to destabilize tribal families and force relocations. Grey Wolf studied the papers with growing fury. His children had nearly died because of one man's ambition. His people had been scattered and hunted based on fabricated threats. Hope felt sick remembering Creed's righteous tone when he demanded the children. He had spoken of duty and law while knowing he had created the crisis himself. His concern for policy masked complete indifference to human suffering. Doc Ashworth explained the broader implications. If Creed's corruption became public, it would expose systematic abuse of federal authority. Other families had been destroyed by his manufactured conflicts. Justice demanded accountability. But exposing Creed meant risking everything. He controlled local law enforcement. He had connections throughout the territorial government. Challenging him directly could result in serious retaliation against anyone involved. Hope looked at the children playing peacefully in her cabin. They had found happiness again after trauma that should have broken them. They deserved better than being pawns in corrupt games played by powerful men. Grey Wolf made his decision first. He would not let Creed's crimes go unpunished. His children's suffering meant something only if it helped prevent other families from facing the same nightmare. Hope agreed immediately. She had already lost her place in the community by protecting the children. She had nothing left to lose except her integrity. That she would never surrender. Doc Ashworth knew the risks better than anyone. Her medical practice could be destroyed. Her reputation would be ruined if Creed's allies turned against her. But her oath as a physician demanded that she first do no harm. Creed's actions violated everything she believed about healing and helping others. Official reports. Hope would document the children's condition and care, proving that Native children could thrive in cross-cultural environments. Her teaching background gave weight to her observations about their educational progress. The children sensed the adults' new determination. Little Moon asked careful questions about what was happening. Hope explained in simple terms that they were working to make sure other children wouldn't face the same dangers. Rising Sun wanted to help somehow. He drew pictures of the night his family was scattered, capturing details that might be useful as evidence. His artistic memory proved remarkably accurate. Thunderheart didn't fully understand the complexity of adult conflicts, but he knew his father and Hope were working together now. That made him feel safer than he had since the terrible storm. Word reached them that afternoon that Creed was gathering support for a forced removal of the children. He had convinced several townspeople that harboring Native children posed a security risk to the entire community. A mob was forming. Men who had been content to shun Hope quietly were now talking about taking direct action. Fear and prejudice were crystallizing into organized hostility. Grey Wolf prepared for the worst. He would not let his children be taken again. Hope felt the same protective instincts rising in her chest. These children had become her family in every way that mattered. Doc Ashworth worked frantically to compile evidence before Creed could act. She needed enough documentation to force territorial authorities to investigate his activities. The cabin felt like a fortress under siege. Outside, voices grew louder and angrier as evening approached. Inside, two unlikely allies prepared to defend their shared family against forces that saw only differences where love had built bridges. The children huddled together, no longer innocent of the hatred that surrounded them, but strengthened by the love that protected them. The mob gathered at sunset, their torches casting angry shadows across the frozen ground. Marshal Creed led them toward Hope's cabin with the confidence of a man who believed justice was on his side. Behind him walked 20 townspeople who had convinced themselves they were protecting their community. Hope watched through her window as the crowd approached. Grey Wolf checked his rifle while positioning himself near the door. Doc Ashworth had hidden the crucial evidence in her medical bag, knowing it might be there. No more negotiations. Hope opened the door slowly. She faced the angry crowd with quiet dignity, showing no sign of the fear coursing through her veins. Behind her stood Grey Wolf, his presence adding strength to her resolve. The sight of the Comanche warrior surprised several townspeople. They had expected to find a helpless woman hiding stolen children. Instead, they confronted a united family prepared to defend itself. Creed pushed past Hope into the cabin. His eyes swept the room, taking inventory of the domestic scene. Children's drawings covered the walls. Books lay open on the table. This looked nothing like the savage hideout he had described to his followers. The children emerged from the bedroom with remarkable composure. Little Moon translated between her father and Hope, demonstrating the bilingual skills she had developed. Rising Sun showed his English writing to anyone willing to look. Thunderheart stayed close to both his protectors, secure in their combined love. Several townspeople shifted uncomfortably. These children didn't match the dangerous narrative Creed had constructed. They appeared healthy, educated, and genuinely happy in their unusual family situation. Mrs. Henderson from the general store stepped forward. She had led the economic boycott against Hope, but seeing the children's artwork gave her pause. Her own grandchildren couldn't write their letters so neatly. Doc Ashworth chose this moment to reveal her evidence. She spread the damning documents across Hope's table, explaining Creed's systematic manipulation of military operations. The medical records painted a clear picture of manufactured conflicts and fabricated threats. Creed's face flushed red as the crowd examined the papers. He accused Doc Ashworth of forgery, but several men recognized official military seals and signatures. The evidence was too detailed and consistent to be fake. Grey Wolf spoke for the first time, his words translated by Little Moon. He described the night his children were lost, providing details that contradicted Creed's official reports. Other tribal leaders had shared similar stories of unprovoked attacks and suspicious timing. The crowd's mood began shifting as the truth emerged. They had been manipulated just as surely as the native families Creed had targeted. Their fears had been exploited to serve his personal ambitions. Hope admit they had been wrong. Violence seemed inevitable until an unexpected voice joined the conversation. Thunderheart stepped forward and began reciting the Pledge of Allegiance in perfect English. His clear young voice carried across the cabin as he spoke about liberty and justice for all. The simple act of patriotism from a Comanche child stunned the crowd into silence. Here was proof that different cultures could coexist and even strengthen each other. The boy's innocent faith in American ideals shamed the adults who had abandoned those principles. Rising Sun followed his brother's example, singing a hymn Hope had taught him, while Grey Wolf hummed a traditional Comanche melody in harmony. The blended music created something beautiful and entirely new. Little Moon spoke directly to the crowd in both languages, explaining how she had learned to love both her father and Hope equally. She didn't understand why adults thought love had to choose sides when children knew better. Mrs. Henderson was the first to lower her torch. Her voice cracked when she apologized to Hope for the months of cruel treatment. Other townspeople began following her example, the anger draining from their faces. Creed realized he was losing control of the situation. He ordered his remaining supporters to seize the children by force. But fewer than half the crowd still backed him, and their enthusiasm had evaporated. Doc Ashworth announced that she had already sent copies of the evidence to territorial authorities in the capital. Investigators would arrive within days to examine Creed's activities. His corruption would face official scrutiny regardless of tonight's outcome. The marshal's carefully constructed facade finally cracked. His desperation showed as he threatened everyone present with federal retaliation. But his words rang hollow now that his true motives were exposed. Grey Wolf placed a protective hand on Hope's shoulder. She covered it with her own, showing the crowd that their partnership transcended racial boundaries. Together they had created something stronger than the hatred that had divided their communities. The children stood between their protectors, living proof that love could bridge any gap. Their courage had turned a potential tragedy into a moment of community healing. The territorial investigators arrived 3 days later, their official carriages stirring dust clouds that settled over Copper Ridge like judgment itself. Marshal Creed watched from his office window as uniformed men unloaded document cases and resources for personal gain while destroying innocent lives. Creed's supporters melted away like spring snow. The businessmen who had profited from his military contracts suddenly claimed ignorance of his methods. Politicians who had praised his aggressive policies developed convenient memory problems about their past endorsements. Hope testified about finding the children and witnessing their recovery under loving care. Her detailed observations as a former teacher carried significant weight with the investigators. She presented the children's artwork and writing samples as evidence of their educational progress in a bicultural environment. Grey Wolf spoke through Little Moon as his translator, describing the unprovoked attack that separated him from his children. His dignified composure impressed Colonel Matthews, who had expected to meet the dangerous savage described in Creed's reports. The children themselves provided the most compelling testimony. They demonstrated their fluency in both languages, shared their artwork depicting life before and after the storm, and showed no signs of the trauma typically seen in kidnapped children. Colonel Matthews questioned them gently about their living situation. Did they feel safe with Hope? Were they happy learning English while maintaining their Comanche heritage? Did they understand they could choose where to live? Little Moon answered for all 3 siblings. They loved both their birth father and their adoptive mother equally. They wanted to keep learning from both cultures. They hoped other children could have the same opportunities, instead of being forced to choose between worlds. The investigation's findings were damning. Creed had orchestrated at least 7 unprovoked military actions against peaceful Native communities. He had falsified reports, embezzled federal funds, and caused immeasurable human suffering for personal advancement. Federal authorities arrested Creed on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of office. His removal from power created an immediate shift in local attitudes toward Native tribes. Without his inflammatory rhetoric poisoning community relations, more reasonable voices began emerging. The legal precedent established by Hope's guardianship changed territorial policy regarding cross-cultural adoption. Children's welfare would take priority over racial considerations in custody decisions. Other families facing similar situations would have legal protection for their choices. Dr. Ashworth received official recognition for exposing the worlds made her invaluable for negotiating peaceful solutions to ongoing conflicts. Grey Wolf embraced this new role as peaceful advocate for his people. His combination of warrior courage and diplomatic wisdom earned respect from both Native leaders and government officials. He established a new model for tribal representation based on cooperation rather than confrontation. The children continued thriving in their unique family structure. They spent summers with Grey Wolf's band, learning traditional hunting and storytelling. They spent winters in Hope's cabin, attending the school she established for children from both communities. Little Moon became Hope's assistant teacher, helping other children navigate between cultures just as she had learned to do. Her bilingual skills and natural empathy made her perfect for bridging communication gaps. Rising Sun developed into a gifted artist whose paintings depicted the harmony possible between different peoples. His work decorated the new community center that brought together settlers and tribal members for shared celebrations. Thunderheart grew into a natural peacemaker who could calm tensions with his infectious optimism. His ability to see good in everyone reminded adults why they were working toward understanding rather than conflict. The town of Copper Ridge transformed gradually but permanently. The community center hosted monthly gatherings where both cultures shared food, music, and stories. Children played together regardless of their backgrounds. Adults learned that diversity strengthened rather than threatened their community. Mrs. Henderson reopened her store to all customers, often keeping special items that tribal members needed. The blacksmith began crafting tools that incorporated both settler and native designs. The general attitude shifted from fear to curiosity about different ways of living. Hope and Grey Wolf never married, but they created a family structure that worked perfectly for their situation. They shared parenting responsibilities while maintaining their distinct cultural identities. Their partnership became a model for other cross-cultural relationships. On the first anniversary of that terrible winter storm, the entire community gathered for a celebration, honoring the family that had changed everything. Hope stood beside Grey Wolf as their children performed songs in both languages for an audience that now saw harmony where they once saw only differences. Little Moon, Rising Sun, and Thunderheart had grown strong and confident, secure in their dual heritage. They moved effortlessly. The barn had indeed changed everything, just as their father had never known they would. The family that shouldn't have existed according to society's rules had instead shown everyone a better way to live together.